So my two biggest takeaways from this episode are 1, Saru is way stronger than he lets on, and 2, Wilson Cruz can have an insanely creepy smile if he wants to. Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 10, Terra Firma Part 2, our second look into the, wait for it, Mirror Universe! I did it! I changed it to red. That red signifies Mirror Universe. Ooh, get it? It's different! It's different! I'm weird, folks. Let's go back to the blue. Anyways, now that I'm done being a complete and total dork, what did I actually think of this episode? As always, I'm going to give you my spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then I'm going to get into spoilers. It's going to be kind of interesting to talk about this one, because I really had to sit with this one for a couple moments after I've watched it, because I really feel like, if I'm talking about general non-spoiler thoughts, I feel like this episode was kind of done a disservice in two distinct but different ways in relation to where it sits as a two-parter, both within relation to part 1 of this episode, but then also in relation to its place within the larger Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, which is itself a very serialized show. Now, what do I mean by that? This episode feels like it really should have been attached to part 1, that we really should have seen this as a 2-hour episode aired at the same time, rather than 2 episodes split over the course of 2 weeks. Because in many ways, the main chunk of this episode, at least the start of this episode, that jumps off of Georgiou's journey in the Mirror Universe from last episode, really feels like it was just continuing on the story from last episode, and it feels like it was sort of cut off at the head a little bit, no pun intended, and kind of stopped the momentum of that story from where we finished last episode, and then kind of continued it here, but I had lost some of the emotional weight because I had to wait a week in order to watch this one, because this felt like it was such a natural extension of that storyline. And then also, the latter half of this episode as well, the sort of when we return back to the Prime Universe, and I won't spoil anything specifically there, but we do obviously go back to the Prime Universe, it does sort of complete some of the storylines that we saw going on at the top half of part 1, which is, if you remember in my review of that episode, one of the big problems I had with that was it sort of felt like, oh, we were just nudging forward these storylines in the Prime timeline in order to get to Georgiou's storyline in the latter half of the episode. But those parts do come back around and complete this episode, again, without getting into specifics of it. And so it felt like this would have felt much better as a cohesive 2-hour whole, and would have felt like a much more complete arc if I just watched it as 2 parts. And, you know, for people in the future who are going to be watching Discovery in a binge or years from now, I think it'll work much better instead of having been cut off between 2 episodes split over 2 weeks. So I feel in many ways this episode was done a disservice because it lost a lot of that momentum and narrative flow that would have been felt had I watched it all at once. The second problem that I have with this episode structurally is its place within the larger Season 3 narrative of Star Trek Discovery. Because Star Trek Discovery is an incredibly serialized show, and while this season has been much more episodic than previous seasons of Discovery, and having a little bit more of a complete story arc within each episode, this 2-parter really feels like it's kind of almost completely removed from the main impetus and narrative that has been going on in Discovery so far. It feels like it's just a complete sidetrack in order to have this story with Empress Georgiou and sort of kind of giving us an interesting, again, without spoiling, character study of her in order to set her up for future things that are going to be happening to her that we already kind of know are going to be happening to her character in the future, just based on outside of, you know, canon stuff, just stuff that we know about productions going around with Star Trek, and the fact that Michelle Yeoh is going to be getting her own Section 31 show. So this felt like it was very much trying to like just have an episode with Georgiou, focusing on her, giving us a kind of a conclusion to her arc so far, and then setting her up for future storylines going into the Section 31 show, again, without getting into specifics of that there. So this episode really feels like it's just taken out of that sort of main thrust of the narrative of Star Trek Discovery, which feels weird because it kind of works against what 2-parters are within Star Trek as a whole, and what we kind of feel about 2-parters. When we see 2-parters within Discovery, or within Star Trek as a franchise, 2-parters are usually like this big momentous moment, these like big events within all of Star Trek. When you look at episodes like Chain of Command, or Best of Both Worlds, or Year of Hell, there are supposed to be these big events within Star Trek universe. But in many ways, this episode within Discovery feels like the opposite of that. It actually feels like this two-parter is smaller in scale than most of Discovery, which again is fine. But considering that this is really put off at the end of this season of Discovery, when we're really kind of at the point where we really need to be pushing, if you're going to be doing this sort of serialized story with a big overarching mystery, we really need to be pushing that mystery forward. So to take this complete sidetrack just feels like a complete diversion from that point. And so, I'm harping really hard in my spoiler-free section, and so I apologize that it's mostly kind of a rant at just the main impetus of this story, but it really is something that I was just feeling the entire time, just this kind of weird structural problem within it. To focus on more non-spoiler thoughts to sort of get beyond that, because I'll focus on some of the more specifics of this criticism that I have later on in my spoiler discussion. But to focus in on this, I do think that this is a strong episode for what it is. Despite all my misgivings or my sort of problems with it sort of structurally in its placement within this season of Discovery, I do think that this is well executed for what it is. It's a really great character study of Yeoh. I think it's sort of really interesting to see how her character has changed, and it's a really interesting diversion into the mirror universe. Again, it feels kind of weightless because it doesn't feel like it's pushing forward Discovery's main storyline. But for what it is, taken on its own terms, I find it interesting and I find it well done and well executed. And I think all the character moments in it are well done. There are a couple moments towards the end of this episode based off events that happen that feel a little bit unearned, mostly around characters' interactions and feelings about Yeoh and the events that happen to Yeoh in this episode. They feel a little bit unearned, but generally I think this is all very well done. And I will say there's also a very, very cool moment that, again, also kind of feels weightless, but it is a very cool moment for Trekkies. You're like, oh, that's so insanely cool. I don't know if it does anything beyond this episode, but it is a cool thing to see within this episode of itself. And that really is just my main thing with this episode. It's well done for what it is. I'm excited for what it is, and I liked what it is. I'm just not sure what this episode is what I wanted at this point in the season of Star Trek Discovery. And I really think that's all I can say, spoiler-free, without getting into the specifics of it. So I'm going to stop this conversation here and say I liked the episode for what it was, but it felt a little bit weird in such a serialized show at this point in its season. One quick note before we leave the spoiler-free section. I just want a quick note. This Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is going to be my Jessie Gender holiday special. I am so excited about it. It's going to be my biggest video that I've ever done on this channel. It's going to have over 30 special guests from around the Star Trek community, including some people that may be working on Star Trek itself right now. That's kind of tantalizing, I hope, and gets you to watch. So, very exciting. A lot of those guests are going to be in the chat at 11 a.m. So if you can join us for the premiere at 11 a.m. Pacific time for the Jessie Gender holiday special, I really am excited to share that all with you on this Friday. But obviously the video will go up at 11, but will still be existing on this channel beyond that. So if you missed the 11 a.m. premiere, it's going to be up. I'm just very excited about it, and I hope that you all enjoy it, and just wanted to promote it before we get into spoilers. So now that we're done with our spoiler-free discussion, let's jump into my spoilers, because I have a lot of thoughts. So now that we're in my spoiler-filled discussion, I kind of am going to be doing this a little bit differently. I am going to kind of focus scene by scene like I usually do, but I'll kind of be doing that a little bit quicker because I really feel like I need to talk a little bit more about this episode as a whole and its sort of place within Star Trek Discovery and the Star Trek franchise at this point in the series, because I feel like that's more the discussion that I kind of want to have about this episode. As is kind of clear, this episode was a character study on Yeoh to sort of show how she has evolved within this show, how she's changed since her time being the Empress of the Mirror Universe. This was very much taking us back to her roots and saying she's not the same person. And I really liked that, and I thought everything that was done in the Mirror Universe to show that she's changed, her taking care of Saru, her trying to change Michael Burnham, all of that was really nuanced take in showing like where she wants to succeed in trying to change Michael Burnham's thought processes and trying to bring her daughter back to her side within that universe, but failing at that, but really also succeeding elsewhere in ways she did not expect, especially with her relationship with the Mirror Universe Saru. I really liked that, and I liked that sort of subversion of tropes, and so I liked that sort of character study of her. And then it becomes this with the Guardian of Forever, which, by the way, the Guardian of Forever was insanely cool, and I'll talk about that in a second, my more specific thoughts on the episode. It's an insanely cool moment, but it's very much there just to be set up for Yeoh going off into the Section 31 spinoff, which is interesting to me because I still question whether that show is actually going to happen. It really kind of concerns me because I feel like we haven't heard much about that show. And honestly, I feel in many ways, probably what happened was the desire for a Captain Pike show, the Strange New World series, kind of upended the sort of production push to have the Section 31 show and sort of shifted CBS's attention to doing the Pike show versus the Section 31 show. So having this sort of setup for the show that I'm not entirely sure is going to happen, it concerns me. And I'm just sort of like, we might have wasted all this time setting up this character of JoJo to sort of have her own series, which is something that may not happen. Now, even if that show doesn't happen, I'm sure we'll get JoJo back at some point. I'm sure she will come back to Discovery if the Section 31 show doesn't happen, and or she'll be appearing in, either Picard or Strange New Worlds at some point, given that she's like sort of time traveled back through time. I'm sure that they will sort of slot her in there if that Section 31 show happens, or worst case scenario, she'll get a book. And there will be some book in the future that will explain what happens to her. But I know we will get a completion to her arc. But I feel like this show is just set up for a Section 31 show that may not happen, and I'm not entirely sure everyone is interested in. Like, don't get me wrong, I would love a Michelle Yeoh-led Star Trek series. I like Michelle Yeoh. I like the character of JoJo. And I don't think Section 31 is a bad idea for a show. I'm just not sure there's much excitement for it. I'm not, like, clamoring for it. I'm not, like, clamoring for it like I was the Pike series that I really, really wanted. Now, Section 31 show could be really good. It could be really interesting, and I'm certainly not against getting it if I get it. But I'm not here being like, yeah, I need that Section 31 show, and this episode really showed me how much I really want that Section 31 show. It doesn't dissuade me from the idea, but it doesn't really, since this really didn't have much to do with Section 31 other than just having Michelle Yeoh be the central character, I really don't know what that show is, and I'm not very excited for it. And so if this episode was trying to get me excited for that, I'm not sure it really succeeded. It did have some really cool moments and has me asking some intriguing questions like where Michelle Yeoh went when she went through the Guardian Forever. My hope and dream would be that she's gone back to Enterprise times, like the 22nd century, like right around the formation of the Federation, so we can sort of get some 22nd century, early Federation, Star Trek Enterprise, maybe even appearances of Captain Archer stuff. I would like that idea and sort of set up in the episode itself of when the Guardian talks about sending her back to a time when the future of the Mirror Universe and the Prime Timeline were more aligned. So that's an incredibly interesting place to put her. I'm just not sure we're going to get it. We might, and Section 31 may happen. We haven't heard much about it other than Kurtzman just saying it's still coming. And this episode was written by the future showrunners of that show, it should be noted. And I trust them because they wrote this episode very well. I'm just kind of stuck here, and I'm sorry that I'm spending so much of my spoiler time, which I usually go in depth on the episode talking about this, but I feel like this is the more warranted discussion with this episode. And so I kind of wanted to have it up front here because I liked this episode, again, for what it was. I'm just not sure I wanted it or needed it, and it felt kind of like a weird sidetrack at this point in Discovery, which feels like it needs to start getting into what is going on with the Burn. As I've said repeatedly over and over again, I'm kind of frustrated at the Burn storyline in that it's never been compelling for me. It's been interesting, but I haven't felt like I need to know about what's happening with the Burn. It's a mystery that I'm intrigued by, but I'm more intrigued by, like, what's the Federation up to at this point? Is Starfleet all up on the up and up? Is there there's more pressing questions that I have that the show seems to be ignoring for this Burn question, which I'm interested in, but it doesn't feel like it needs to be solved right this moment. And so Discovery, at this point in its season, with I think only 3 episodes left at this point, needs to make that more compelling to me. And it took this weird sidetrack that is good for what it is, but feels like it was setting up something I didn't really necessarily ask for, and distracted from what needs to be happening at this point in Discovery if this show wants to be a serialized show and have a serialized story. If Discovery just wants to be an episodic show, which is totally good, I've liked the episodic feel of the season, that's fine, but then don't keep reminding me of this mystery that I don't care about and then sort of ignore it yourself. And so I'm honestly just talking this all out. I'm frustrated at this episode. I like it for what it is. I just don't like it within this point of the season of Discovery. And it also confuses me within the larger context of where Star Trek is going as a whole. So yeah, everybody, that is my feelings on this episode as a whole. And I know this is slightly different structurally from what I normally do for my reviews, but I had to talk about this way because I feel like it's the only way I could really talk about this episode. I'm going to, because I've spent so long sort of ranting about other things and sort of this episode as a whole, I'm going to give my thoughts on the scene-by-scene analysis like I usually do, but I'm going to kind of truncate it a little bit because I kind of touched upon larger things within this episode. So I am going to still do my scene-by-scene analysis starting right now, but it's going to be a little bit more truncated. So I apologize on that front. All right, getting into the scenes of it. We start off with Giorgio and Burnham in the cell. I think that was a really fun scene. It sort of starts Giorgio off in this arc of like, I want to try and change Burnham. I want to try and mold her for the better. I like this idea that Giorgio is trying to hide the fact that she really cares for Burnham, try to hide the fact that she has changed, but you can tell that she's putting up that front, but that she is also trying to reach out to Burnham and try and show her that there can be a different way, to try and use her understanding of both the mirror universe and the prime universe to try and mold Burnham's mind in a new way, to show Burnham, this mirror universe Burnham, that there's a different way forward. And I really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed the scene when there was sort of the montage of sequences of Burnham being tortured and beaten up, and this sort of monologue by Giorgio over this, saying like, I've seen what we can be, I've seen us be luminous, but I need to teach you this way. I need to teach you through pain in order to get you to understand this beautiful thing that I saw. And it's sort of a warped understanding of what the prime universe is, that Giorgio is trying to get to this love and trying to get to this luminous version of the Federation that she's seen, but she's doing it in a way that she knows how to do it, and that's through pain, and that's what ultimately fails. But then we get this beautiful scene with her and Burnham where she connects with Mirror Burnham through love, through telling her stories of her night terrors. And I really adored that scene, where it was the first scene where Mirror Giorgio actually reached out in caring for Burnham, and that's what got Burnham to start eating. It was such a beautiful sort of usage of the ideas of the Federation and the Prime Universe, and showing that Giorgio finally kind of started to learn, no, you have to change your ways if you really want to make the future better. You have to reach out in love and caring and compassion, rather than in anger and pain and hatred. And she does the same with Saru. And I love the scene with her and Saru. I think it is one of the most beautiful scenes throughout this whole episode, where she connects with Saru. And Doug Jones and Michelle Yeoh play that scene absolutely beautifully together. I think that I'm going to miss their dynamic so much now that Michelle Yeoh is off the show. Presumably, I really think the scenes between Doug Jones and Michelle Yeoh actually have been, looking back on it, some of the highlights of the scenes with Michelle Yeoh as a character. I think they just do brilliant work together. And the scene between the two of them was really great, with her reaching out to Saru and saying like, you can be stronger, you can be better. Again, reaching out in compassion and understanding who he is, and him being able to empathize with that and feeling compassion for her, and saying you really felt Doug Jones Saru when he was saying to Michelle Yeoh, it's like, you're not a Terran. You need to get out of here because you're going to be hurt and harmed, and you could sense his caring. And I like how that pays off in the end with, while Mirror Burnham betrays Giorgio, and that's the thing that hurts Giorgio the most, because she thought that was the relationship she was finally able to nurture, but she had so harmed and traumatized Burnham and warped her mind from before, and sent her off to kill her friends, as we see in that wonderful montage sequence, that Mirror Burnham in many ways was sadly too far gone, and that is Michelle Yeoh's fault. That is Michelle Yeoh, that is Giorgio's fault. And so that's why she feels such pain at that betrayal. But she did make a difference with Saru. And I love that her death scene in this episode is with Saru, as he says, you've stepped through, and he feels the compassion, and that her compassion was not wasted in this universe in her time here, because she did influence somebody with her compassion. But it also shows how trauma and pain might be going too far with Mirror Burnham, and I like that betrayal. So I thought all of that stuff in the Mirror Universe was absolutely beautiful and wonderfully done. I really adored it for what it is. The only real major negative of these sequences that I will say that kind of frustrated me a little bit was there was a lot of talk of Lorca. I was like, Lorca, we need to go after Lorca, we need to get Lorca, which led me to believe like, oh, we're going to see Jason Isaacs in this episode. I was like kind of getting prepped and excited for that moment, but then we didn't get him. Which is fine, but I felt like if they were not going to have Jason Isaacs appear, I would have rather them not say Lorca so much. Like, yes, mention him because he is obviously important, especially to Burnham's arc and where Mirror Universe Burnham was going. But I would have just referenced him once or twice, not made him like a main talking point of this entire episode, because it sort of set me up for that expectation that was eventually kind of knocked down, which was a little bit sad. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit disappointed. It's not necessarily the show's fault, because they didn't necessarily tell me that was going to happen, but it kind of set me up for that expectation, which kind of saddened me. Also, one other thing that I forgot to mention in this sequence is I really love that they flipped and sort of inverted the opening credits of the episode. It felt a little bit disappointing when compared to Star Trek Enterprise, which when it did its Mirror Universe episodes, it did it a whole separate theme song and different like cut of the opening edit. So I was like, oh, this is kind of a simpler way of doing that. It was just like flipping and reversing the images of the theme song. I thought it was cool and a cool acknowledgement and also a cool like little reference to Star Trek Enterprise, but when compared to what Star Trek Enterprise did for its 2 Mirror Universe episodes, I'm like, oh, it's not as cool as that, though. Just one way that Star Trek Enterprise is obviously the best Star Trek show, and not going to lie about it. Then we come back to the Prime Universe, and we get the really cool scenes finally delving into what Karl was. I remember last episode I was so excited about Karl, and I did have some hintings towards the idea that he was the Guardian of Forever, but the moment when he says, I am the Guardian of Forever, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And when he forms into the Guardian Forever, I thought that was just a really, really wonderful moment. And I love all the discussions and scenes with him in this episode. I like the idea of him. I like the idea of the Guardian Forever having been used during the Temple Wars and the Guardian Forever kind of having trauma and PTSD from that. I like this idea that we've been seeing throughout all of the season of Discovery is that the universe has scars because of what's happened to it, whether it's from the Temple Wars or it's from the burn or other things like that, but things that we normally see like Vulcan, like Trill, like Earth, like the Guardian of Forever have all had permanent damage and scars done to them because of all the trauma that has happened throughout the entire galaxy, partially because of the Federation. And so I like seeing those just buried scars come back up, and I like the fact that Guardian Forever has been changed and is in hiding because of how it was used by the Temporal Wars. I just thought that that was a great little seeding of that idea here. I know it's kind of a little bit of a fan servicey moment, and a little bit fan servicey and like, hey, look, it's the Guardian Forever, not necessarily using the Guardian Forever for a natural point. Oh, look, it's the Guardian Forever, doing Guardian Forever things. But if you look at through the context of like, here's things that we've seen throughout Star Trek, but now they have trauma and scars. The Guardian of Forever, something that we thought would be beyond trauma like this, itself has scars because of the Temporal Wars, I think fits in with the larger themes of Discovery. And so I like its use here, even if it is a little bit of a fan servicey moment and a little bit of like, hey, cool, it's the Guardian of Forever, right? You like the Guardian of Forever. I think it's effectively used for what it's done. I also like the idea that while Michelle Yeoh's trip into, I keep saying Michelle Yeoh, while Georgiou's trip into the Mirror Universe was sort of just a test for her, I like the little hints that the Guardian gives that he's like, well, the Kelpians will survive. There's going to be changes in that universe, that timeline. And I like this idea that that Mirror Universe that we saw was a slightly different Mirror Universe. And it still exists because of Georgiou's changes that she made to it, but it might not necessarily be the Mirror Universe that we've seen earlier in Discovery. It might be changed in a different way, or it might be what leads to the Klingon-Cardassian alliance that we see in Deep Space Nine. I just like the acknowledgement that while it was sort of a test for Georgiou to like see how she's changed, it wasn't completely meaningless, that her effects on Saru actually change that timeline, and actually it still exists in some way, shape, or form, even if we never really get to see it going forward, or if we ever see that it was the actual Mirror Universe that we've seen before that affected it. I don't think that it was a sort of like holodeck type thing where it was just all in her head. It actually did happen, but because of wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff that the Guardian of Forever can do in changing timelines, that it still existed, but it was able to be sort of cordoned off and not affect everything. I kind of like that idea. It's one of those like very heady ideas that I think if we sat down and like thought about it a lot, it would be a bit confusing. But I just think I kind of like that idea of like multiple parallel timelines and it still having weight, even though it really was just a function of getting Georgiou to explore her character a little bit more. Then we get the scene where Georgiou gets sent off into the other, wherever she's going to go in her Section 31 show. And I've talked about that enough, so I won't harp on it too much. Like I said, I am very excited about where that show would be, especially if it's set during the Enterprise timeline. If he sent her back to the 22nd century, I think that would be very, very cool. But we will obviously have to wait to either if the Section 31 show happens or wherever Michelle Yeoh's character eventually reappears if that show does not happen. My guess would be if Section 31 show does not happen, she will most likely show back up on Strange New Worlds, teaming up with Ash Tyler's character on that show, who became the head of Section 31 at the end of season 2 of Discovery. So my presumption would be that if the Section 31 show doesn't move forward, that she will show up just on Strange New Worlds, because I feel like Star Trek loves Michelle Yeoh. Michelle Yeoh is great, and so it'd be a very sad thing if Star Trek lost Michelle Yeoh at this point. So if Section 31 doesn't happen, I'm sure we'll get her at some point back in Strange New Worlds. That would be my guess. Maybe Picard as well. She could also appear in Star Trek Picard, but I think a more natural fit, given that Ash Tyler's there, would probably be Strange New Worlds if Section 31 doesn't happen. And my bet would be if Section 31 does happen, she'll be in the 22nd century. But I'm sort of saddened that we didn't get to see any hint of where she's going, but I think that's just sort of left open because the showrunners don't know if Section 31 is going to happen. That's my guess. I don't have any insider knowledge on any of that, just sort of my supposition based on the fact that we have not heard a lot about Section 31, even though that technically was in production or pre-production prior to even Strange New Worlds even being thought about, and yet Strange New Worlds is the one in production. So I'm sort of looking at that fact and me being like, well, maybe Section 31 stalled out. I don't know if we're actually going to get it. So that's all I'll say about that, because I've already harped on that enough, but just something to be thinking about. And then we sort of get the rest of the episode, which is also sort of finishing out those mini arcs that we saw at the beginning of part 1 of this episode. I like that Book was able to, help the problem with the burn because he actually read the Starfleet manual. I like that he was sort of having this arc of oh, I am starting to learn to be some more Starfleet. I am starting to learn to fit in here a little bit more, but he's still kind of on the outs a little bit. And that's sort of addressed with Admiral Vance, who's you need to be following Starfleet regulations. You can't be using, Emerald Chain technology. And he's well, there's some value in having me be an outsider on the outside of Starfleet, but still helping you. And Admiral Vance kind of being yeah, I kind of find that interesting. I also like that Admiral Vance sort of mentions oh, Michelle Yeoh will be missed, Georgiou will be missed, to Saru, sort of completing that arc. And then we also get Admiral Vance saying, you're not distracted by the fact that this was Kelpians, are you? That you weren't hiding this from me because you were going to be distracted by it. And I like sort of Vance calling Saru out on that. But Saru kind of hiding it a little bit, I feel. And I'm curious if that will be coming up as we explore the burn in future episodes, if this sort of the fact that they are Kelpians will matter more, if it was just a small mini arc for this episode. Again, we'll sort of see how that goes going forward. I can't really judge it until I see that point, but I liked how it concluded here, but I am curious how it's going to be fitting into the larger narrative going forward, given that there's only 3 more episodes, and I just need to see more about the burn at this point. So there's that. I like that. The one note that I will say is the funeral for Georgiou felt a little bit unearned. I can appreciate that all of this feeling that these characters have did happen, that they do appreciate Georgiou, but we've never really seen that on the show. Georgiou really felt like she was just kind of there annoying everybody through the show, and I never really saw her have much of a meaningful connection with anybody outside of Burnham. And so the goodbye that Burnham gives to Georgiou on the planet before she steps into the Guardian Forever was really beautiful and really wonderful, and I like that. I like Burnham saying, you were my Georgiou because of the things that I felt for you were your own. They weren't connected to, the Captain Georgiou that I knew. I felt things for you that were unique to you. And I thought that was a well-earned scene and well done between Burnham and Georgiou. The funeral scene didn't work for me because I don't feel like those connections that everyone was talking about in that funeral scene were truthful to how we've seen them interact on the show. I could believe that it happened off screen, behind the scenes, or in scenes that we didn't get to see on the show. But from what I've seen, those goodbyes did not ring as true as they ultimately could have. So ending on that note felt a little bit unearned. I don't want to say dishonest because I feel like it felt like it could have happened just in between scenes. So it didn't feel like it was out of character for any of these people. It just felt like it wasn't earned within the show. And so I didn't really feel much during that scene. I felt a lot more between the goodbye between Georgiou and Burnham before she stepped into the Guardian of Forever. So yeah, I think that's sort of my, feelings on this episode. I know this one was a very different structurally type of review than I've done in the past, but I just had kind of a lot of thoughts about this episode in particular that I kind of wanted to get off my chest and kind of needed to rant about. So please forgive me for being a little bit indulgent in the structure of my reviews, that it was a little bit different than I would think that you would normally expect. But I really felt like this episode kind of warranted a slightly different type of discussion, given that it was a slightly different type of episode for Discovery. But enough of my rambling. What did you think of this episode of Star Trek Discovery? Did you like Terra Prime Part 2? Or did you have more mixed feelings about it like I did? I'd love to hear all that down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more reviews of Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek stuff, and reviews of other shows and sci-fi franchises. I also have a Patreon that you can help me out on. Also, don't forget, this Friday is my Christmas special, so please go check that out. I'm really excited to share that all with you. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you to all of my patrons this month, but especially Amanda Ronye Idanya, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmoss, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Munir Amlani, Chamomile T., Stephen Schuhart, Wellington Marcus, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Roar, Christina Dalliance, Dominic Noble, John Steele, Michael Beam. She sells seashells by the seashore of Bajor. William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, The Sir Spence, BBD, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Jason Knott, Andrew Jorgensen, Chris Brown, Jasmine, Maeve, Bree Beecher, Subraxis, Skylar Gray, Nathan Steele, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Geek Filter, Bush, Celestial Dawn, Din, Sarah Bastam, Polly Mina, Jacob Tovar, Piston Twisted Garage, Lily, Jean Mithune, Andrew Lamori, Lysa, Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and KT Dunn. Thank you so much to all of you. You're quite literally making my dreams come true, so I cannot tell you how thankful I am.